feel like we started on a good collab, so I think I might end it there.
Yeah.
So, like I said, my name is Alex Mayer, and this is the wonderful world of mechanical keyboards. I will start this off with a warning. Money with wings. Mechanical keyboards are deceptively expensive. You start off with one mechanical keyboard you got on Amazon for 40 bucks, and a couple of years later you're trying to explain to your wife why you need a third $250 keyboard because you just don't know if the first two that you had are really what you want. So what is a mechanical keyboard? Mechanical keyboards are actually short for mechanical switch keyboards. So each key has a spring-loaded mechanical switch underneath of it. That's where the mechanical keyboard gets its name. Why would you use a mechanical keyboard? So you're on a keyboard for 8 hours a day. It's the input to your computer, so you probably should have a good experience. So mechanical keyboards are a little bit higher quality. They're made out of better materials. They're also customizable. You can change which keys do what. You can have different layouts. They're also can be more ergonomic if you have wrist pain or something. You can have a split keyboard or change the angle of the keyboard. Again, part of the customizability. Also for accessibility. If you have limited mobility in one of your hands, you can make a one-handed keyboard. If you have limited vision, you could make a keyboard with Braille on it or something. I'm not quite sure a lot in that space, but you can do stuff like that. Plus, they're just fun to type on. All right, so I'm going to talk about form factors. These are the sizes and shapes of the keyboards. So everybody's probably familiar with keyboards that look something like this. So this is a full size or 100% keyboard. Often form factors are expressed in sizes like percents. So on the American keyboards, they have 104 keys. On the international keyboards, they'll have 105 keys.
Are these your actual keyboards, Alex?
If it doesn't have a name at the bottom as credits, these are the keyboards that I have owned or owned currently.
Nice.
So this is a 10 keyless keyboard. It gets the name because you can see on the right side, you just chop off the number pad, and the rest of the keyboard is identical. These have 87 keys. They're really nice. You can buy any size keycap sets for these. So if you want to start off, this is a great way to start off. And I often tell people, think about how often you actually use the number pad. If you're a system admin, you're typing IP addresses all day, this probably isn't for you. If you're a developer, this works great. Or just want a little bit more space for your mouse. So if you're doing gaming, this gives you a tiny bit more space for your mouse if you're not using that number pad.
Appreciate the any key.
Oh yeah, that any key's great. And it's on N, which is the most any key. Moving down a little bit, we got the 65% keyboard. So this has between 66 and 68 keys. You can see you lose the function row at the top. You also lose part of the cluster where the arrow keys were. They're just kind of smushed in. One thing to watch out if you do want to get this size of a keyboard, the shift key throws people. It is a non-standard shift size, so you have to, if you want a keycap set that will fit this board, you have to make sure you get the shift that fits. This is a 60% keyboard. So I brought this with me today. This is my wife's keyboard. This is a 60% keyboard, has 61 keys. It is identical to the 100% keyboard if you have just the center of the keyboard. So if you take the function row off and the arrow cluster and everything over, it's identical. So this is great again. This is probably the most popular size of custom keyboard.
So wait, you have all these keyboards and you took her keyboard?
Mine too, we'll get into that. This is just 60% keyboard. Like I said, this is the most popular size, so I just wanted to bring one so people could kind of see. But yeah, if you cut the center out of a regular size 100% keyboard, this is what it would look like. So buying keycaps for this size keyboard, very easy. This is a 50% ortho-linear keyboard. It has between 58 and 60 keys, depending on what layout you go with. Ortho-linear refers to the fact that all the columns and rows are straight up and down instead of what is called staggered, which is a typical keyboard where the rows kind of go, or the columns kind of go sideways a little bit.
Is there only one shift on that keyboard?
We'll get to that, but yes, there is only one shift on this keyboard. Yes. So this is my keyboard. This is my 40% keyboard. I use this as a daily driver. All of the keys, people say the keyboard's too small, how could they use it? All of the keys are the same size as a regular keyboard. They're all just what is called 1U or 1 unit. So it's no smaller than an actual, if you just took the letters out of the center of the keyboard, it's about that size. It has between 46 and 48 keys, depending on if you go with the 2U space bars, or if you have just single units all the way around like I do. Keyboards go even smaller. So the Korn keyboard has 42 keys. The Gherkin keyboard has 30 keys. The Payne 27, which is the picture over there, has 27 keys. That's one for each letter and a space bar. And stenography keyboards can have between 20 and 26 keys. So up until now, most of these were just single boards. So we'll talk about some split keyboards here. So the advantage of split keyboards, they have a little bit better ergonomics. If you, so they give reduced wrist bend angle. So if you think about how you use a normal keyboard, your wrists are in here. With a split keyboard, you can bring it out, your wrists are straighter. I am not going to pretend that I know how to say this word, but that's the technical term for how bent your wrists are. They also have tenting, so if you have your hands by your side and you bring your hands up, you'll notice they're this way, but you type this way, and that's a little bit less of a natural position. So tenting allows you to bring that angle out a little bit, so you can have a little bit more comfort. Again, if you have wrist pain, things like this, definitely help. Also, they're easier to travel with. So this is an Ergodox EZ. This is a split keyboard. When I had this keyboard, I usually had it a little bit further apart so the arms were straightforward, and then I could have my mouse in the middle. I use a trackball mouse so I didn't have to move it much. You'll notice that it has tenting, the silver things on the side allow you to tilt the keyboard side to side and front to back. It also has a thumb cluster. So one thing that split keyboards offer is your thumbs do more. If you think about most people use the space bar or maybe the Alt, but you're just doing that with one thumb, so your thumbs are just kind of doing nothing. On this keyboard, your thumbs are responsible for a lot more stuff.
Is that wireless?
This is not wireless. I just don't have it hooked up. I just was taking fancy photos.
Does Ergodox make a wireless?
Ergodox does not make a wireless in this one. In fact, I don't think Ergodox makes any wireless keyboards actually. No, but this would have one cable that connects the two halves, and then one of the halves would be connected to your computer.
Yeah, I have a split. I have a Kinesis.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's going to be very similar to that. I think those have cables as well. Whoops, skip a slide. The next split is the Cornish Zen. I said they're easier to travel with. If you look at each of these, on each side of the keyboard is about the size of that phone. So you can imagine if you had to travel with these, you can put them in your pockets, you can put them in a backpack very easily. They stack together. They make cases for these where you can travel with them. These are also Bluetooth, so they're wireless, so you don't have to carry a bunch of cables with you. Don't get your hopes set on buying this keyboard. It was a group buy. They aren't doing it. I'm still waiting for the second group buy. All right, parts of the keyboard. So we went over a couple of different shapes and sizes. Now let's go over what all the keyboards have in common. So keycaps, these are the plastic things that you with letters and symbols on them. There are different profiles. You can see I have the profiles on the side. So the top two there, SA and MT3, they're typically preferred by typists. They have a little bit of a sculpted feel to them. Most people are probably familiar with OEM if you just buy like a cheap keyboard. Or one of the plastic ones that comes with your computer probably came with an OEM style cap. A slight variation on that is Cherry or GMK, a little bit shorter. That's a very common keycap set, so GMK sells a ton of different color profiles. XDA and DSA, these are a flatter profile, and they're better for gaming. The keycaps won't interfere when you're just trying to move real fast. And MPK at the bottom there, you saw that on the corn. Just if you have a low profile switch, you want a low profile cap just to keep the whole keyboard kind of portable. Materials for these, typically they're made out of PBT or ABS plastic. They can be made out of metal, wood, ceramic. There's people out there doing all types of stuff. If they are made out of plastic, there's two different variations. So there's single shot or double shot. So single shot is single injection molding, just one plastic, one color, and then you usually print on top of it for ABS plastic. For PBT, you can do subliminal dye, or I forget exactly what it's called. The dye essentially soaks into the plastic. For double shot, you get two plastics, different colors, but one mold has a kind of a cutout, and then the second mold doesn't have that cutout, so it fills it in so that both colors of plastic go the entire way through the keycap, so they wear very evenly. Instead of, like, if you've ever seen a keyboard with letters worn off, this will not happen if you buy a double shot keycap. There are a couple different types of homing. The two that I'm most familiar with is what is called bump homing, and that's probably what most of you are familiar with. If you, on the F and the J key on a typical keyboard, you have a little bump. That's how you can kind of feel when you're on the home row. The top two here, the SA and MT3, as well as XDA and DSA, use what's called deep dish homing. So visually, you can't really see which one it is, but if you put your hands on the keyboard, you can feel one of the keycaps has a much deeper dish, so it kind of hugs your fingers a little bit better, and that helps you find where the home row is. Keycaps are where keyboard dreams go to die. So many group buys, so many limited runs. You will find the perfect color scheme for your keycaps, and you will find one forum post about it 6 years ago, and it was a call to see like an interest check, and it never went anywhere. And you just pray and hope that it comes out again. But oftentimes it does not, so just move on if you find that. All right, switches. These are the clicks and the clacks. So the click is the sound that the switch makes when it goes down. The clack is the sound when it comes back up. I learned that while writing this talk. I had no idea. I heard about clicks and clacks, but I didn't know that they were actually like kind of terms for the actual keyboard. So this is where the mechanical keyboard gets its name. When pressed, it completes a mechanical circuit. So you can see the silver part in the middle there, not the spring, is the leaf. And then the stem, which is the red part there, will push the leaf back and forth. This either opens or closes, and the two prongs on the bottom, so that whatever's connected to the bottom of the switch can tell if the switch is either open or closed. And that is the mechanical part of it. There are three types. We're going to talk about those: linear, tactile, and clicky. Dozens of manufacturers. So a lot of people are familiar with Cherry. All the colors that I'm going to be talking about today, and all the images are Cherry switches. But there are dozens of manufacturers, and they come in all different colors. There's a couple of different socket types. So Cherry MX is probably the most popular type. And I put and clones there because people always put Cherry MX compatible next to their switches because they can't say they're Cherry MX because whatever, legal reasons. There's also Alps. I'm not really sure what the appeal is with Alps, but they're another type of mechanical switch. They have a slightly different socket that they fit into, so you need to be aware when you're buying these if they're Cherry MX or Alps. There's also Cherry Low Profile. Those are on things like you saw, the Cornish Zen, a very small switch. These switches are about probably ½ inch tall, so it makes your keyboard a lot taller. Also, Trope. If you get into the mechanical keyboard community, people say Trope is a mechanical switch. Other people will be like, no, absolutely not. So I added here with a question mark to kind of appease everybody. So these are linear switches in Cherry. Those are called red. Some people call them reds, even if the stem is not red, but that refers to a linear switch. So they have a very smooth press. As you can see, the left side, your guys' left, there's no bump or anything on that. It's just one kind of slant all the way down to complete that circuit. These come in very light spring weights and very heavy spring weights. So these are great for gaming, or if you've ever possibly at McDonald's when they had the old style cash registers, they might have had a Cherry MX black switch, which was a linear switch with a very heavy spring. But typically today, these are preferred by gamers. They don't need the tactile feedback or any kind of feel. They just want to hit the switch and move on. They're already past it. But it happened seconds ago in their head, and they're just not executing that command. So very popular among gamers. The next is the most popular. This is the brown switches. Again, they don't have to be brown, but Cherry Browns. So they have feedback when you actuate. If you look at where the stem meets the leaf, you can see that there's a little bump there. You can kind of see in the animation. You get feedback when the switch is actually actuated. These are good for office use or for typists. Next, we have blue switches or clicky switches. So similar to tactile switches, all clicky switches are tactile. You get feedback when it actuates, but you also get an audible click sound. There are two types of clicking mechanisms. The one featured here is called a click jacket, so that's a piece of plastic that moves up and down and kind of bounces around and gives you your click sound. There's also a click bar. This is just a bar with tension, and when the switch is pressed, it kind of flicks back and hits the top of the housing, and that's what gives us all the click. Personally, I prefer the click bar. I think it gives a little bit better of a sound, but people prefer both, so I figured I'd put this both here. These are good for typists, also good for anybody looking to annoy coworkers. If you are programming or just navigating the web or something, there's not much, it won't really bug you, but if you get into Slack and start typing a message, you really notice how much sound these things make. So next we have the switch plate. So this holds all the switches in place. Materials that it can be made out of, it can be made out of metals, so typically aluminum or brass. It can also be made out of steel, any metal that you can cut holes into really. It can be made out of carbon fiber. Also FR4, which is a PCB material, so if you get your PCB printed by some manufacturer, you can also get them to make you a switch plate or possibly a upper or lower housing for your keyboard. Some of these are integrated into cases, so there are some cases that are called gasket mounts, so that is a top and a bottom. The PCB kind of fits in the middle and then it's sandwiched together and screwed together. With those, sometimes the switch plate is integrated into the case, the top of the case. Stabilizers. As the name implies, they stabilize things. They are often called stabs. So these are used for keys that are 2U or larger. I would say 2U stands for 2 units. So if you think about the letter keys on a typical keyboard, that's 1 unit. So a 2U would be double that wide. A 7U would be 7 times that wide. That's how they refer to the key sizes. You can also have fractions of the size. So typically 2U, you don't really need it, but once you get to a 3U, you do need it. So if you think about a space bar, there's one switch in the middle, long space bar. So if you pressed on one side, it would kind of like lean. So what a stabilizer does is it's actually a wire, and in the back, and on each side, it connects to that same switch, so it moves up and down in unison. So if you tap one side, the other side is kind of moved up and down with it. It keeps the space bar level. There are a couple of different mounting options for these, so if you're buying one, or if you're buying a keyboard that needs stabilizers, make sure you find out which one you need. So there's PCB mount, this is probably the most common. There are two types of PCB mount, you can have screw in or clip in, and also there are some that mount into the plate. Next we have the controller. So this is the brains of the keyboard. So this sits between your PCB or your hand wiring and the computer. And it converts the actual presses of the key to keyboard codes that it sends to the computer. Typically they're connected to a computer over USB, but they can also be connected via Bluetooth. So in the upper right-hand side there, you have the Nice Nano, that's a Bluetooth controller. The dark blue one there is the Pro Micro. That was probably one of the first ones they used, it's an Arduino, but you can use it for mechanical keyboards. And then we have the Elite Pi and the Elite C. So tons of different controllers. This is not a comprehensive list, but I just want to show you they're different. They all have the exact same form factor. I don't know if they all have the exact same pinout, but they all have the exact same form factors. They all fit on pretty much any board you want. Okay, so the printed circuit board, or PCB. This connects all the electrical components together. So it connects your switches, your controller. It can have a USB port on it. It can house things like LEDs if you want to have LEDs. This one, I'm not sure if you guys can see on the TV, but it also has hot swap sockets, so those little black with the silver tabs on the side. That allows you to put switches in and take switches out without having to solder. So that's awesome if you find a keyboard with hot swap sockets. You can try out a bunch of different switches, put it in, try it out for a week, and then change it. It can also have an integrated controller. It doesn't have to. As we'll get to a little bit later in the talk. And then cases. So this holds all the stuff. After you put everything together, you put it in a case, and that kind of keeps it nice and tidy. Materials it's going to be made out of aluminum, plastic. If you got underglow LEDs, acrylic is really nice because it kind of shines through and lights everything up. You can make it out of wood. I've seen people on Reddit make them out of cement, so you kind of do what you want to. I guess it doesn't. There's no real functional thing besides it has to hold all the stuff. So go crazy. These have a large effect on how the keyboard will sound. If you have clicky switches in a wood case, it will sound way different than in an aluminum case. So if you're looking for a specific sound, make sure you find a case that is the style you want. And then finally, cables. So they can be USB, TRRS, those are typically used to connect two halves of the keyboard together if you have a split keyboard, or VGA. Any cable that really has electrical signals that can pass through it, you can use. So Scotto will show, I think, a couple of his keyboards later. He has, he can be one with VGA connecting the two halves, just for kind of internet fame, I guess. So let's talk about open source hardware. So you can find open source PCBs. The top right, that's a core, and the lower left, it's a plain 60C, so that's a 60% keyboard. So you can find both split keyboards, standard size keyboards. They have 100% PCBs open source. They're usually designed in something called KiCad. That's open source software. It does an electronics design automation. It is an electronics design automation suite. After you design your PCB in KiCad, or if you just find one on GitHub you want to download, you can get it printed or cut at one of these manufacturers. There are more than this, but these are just kind of two examples that I've heard about in the communities. So PCBWay or JLC PCB. You can send them. JLC PCB I know does like surface mount soldering. So you can have them cut it and then mount like the resistors and some other stuff. Just a note, not all of them do controllers or USB ports. So even if you do get it printed there, some soldering will be required on your end. Cases. There are open source cases for every size of keyboard. So standard sizes down to totally custom. Obviously, none of these are normal shaped keyboard. These are all Joe Scotto's keyboards. So the one on the lower right-hand side there is the one with the VGA cable connecting the two halves. But these are all obviously totally custom sized. These are all hand-wired keyboards. So you can print these custom cases and then hand-wire up your keyboard, put a controller on it, and then go off to the races. A lot of them are 3D printable. I have heard that there are ways you can take the 3D printable files that they give you and then get them like CNC or machined, so you can make them out of aluminum as well if you want to. They both hand-wired and PCB keyboards. There are templates for both. They're also open source keycap sets, which I learned while writing this talk. So you can see this one, instead of being flat or like just kind of curved, it has a curve for each finger going back and forth, and it's actually customizable. It's the link is at the bottom, but that's a GitHub repo, and it goes super into depth on how to program this keycap set so that when you 3D print it, it comes out looking the way you want it. But there are full customizable sets. There's also standard sets. A lot of them are 3D printable, but again, I think you could probably get them machined if you wanted to make them out of something else. Okay, open source firmware. So firmware is the software that runs the keyboard. So quantum mechanical keyboard, or QMK for short, is probably the most popular one. So this was started by Jack Hubbard, of Ortholinear Keyboard, or OLKB. So he started making keyboards and needed firmware to run it, so he forked another project and did a ton of work to actually get it working, and people just keep adding new keyboards on almost a daily or weekly basis. Very well established. So this project strives to do all computer input devices, so not just keyboards, so it does keyboards, encoders, pointing devices, which could be a mouse or a trackpad. Key maps are written in C, so if you want to compile your own, you need to know a little bit of C. There's a link there for that. So VIA and VIAL, these are graphic user interfaces. You can remap keys in real time, so you flash firmware one time, and then you can kind of use these graphic user interfaces. You can click on a key and then press, you want it to be A now, and when you press that key, now it's an A. So VIA is a feature inside of QMK, and VIAL is a fork of QMK. They are both, from what I can tell, sort of a pain. I've never used them personally, but they both seem like sort of a pain to set up. They require creating a ton of key map files on top of your key map, and also, you have to flash special firmware, so you have to give yourself a UUID, or not UUID, HID, like for USB, so that you can distinguish your keyboard from everybody else. And if you want it to work automatically, you have to make an upstream pull request to get your keyboard to just show up when you plug it in. You don't have to do that. You don't have to make any pull requests if you don't want to. You can load manual key maps, but then every time you plug your keyboard in, you have to manually load the key map again. And then there is the Zephyr mechanical keyboard, or ZMK. This is slightly newer. So this is built on top of the Zephyr OS, which is an open source real-time operating system run by the Linux Foundation. They strive for wireless first for everything. So they have Bluetooth support, they have great Bluetooth support. A lot of keyboards that are built with this use the nice Nano controller from before. They also have automatic GitHub builds. So you don't have to fork the entire project, you just kind of make your key map file, put that in a GitHub repo and push it, and then GitHub Actions, just build your firmware and you can just download it. So you don't have to install any tooling locally, that's very nice. You don't have to build that by hand. They have a command and you can tell it, here's my keyboard and here's the specs, and it will just kind of build that key map for you. It's very awesome. Key maps, if you do have to write your own key maps, are written in device tree syntax. I'm not sure here if anybody's ever used device tree syntax. Not very friendly. Or maybe it is, I don't know. But when I looked at it, it looked very confusing. So it's not like C or any other language where you can kind of look up like, oh, this is an array. Obviously, this is how it works. Everything in device tree syntax is like, here's a device and here's a pointer. This points to that, and when you point to that, it does this thing. So a little bit more confusing. But if you want more information about it there, they do have a lot of supported keyboards, and they break it down, they very well documented on how to make, if you want to make a custom keyboard. So how to actually do it. Firmware features. Okay, so those were different examples of firmware. Now let's go over the features. So these are things that the firmware can do. So one thing with mechanical keyboards that have a firmware that you can flash in them, not all mechanical keyboards you can flash your own firmware, but if you do get a mechanical keyboard that you can flash your own firmware, any button can be any letter or symbol or modifier or combination of it. It does not have to adhere to any kind of a standard. If you want the Q key, where it typically would be on a keyboard, to be a 7, you could do that. You don't even have to have a Q key on your keyboard. You can do whatever you want. Layers. So think of layers similar to a shift key. If you press the A key, you get a lowercase a, but if you hold shift and press A, you get a capital A. Layers are very similar. If I press the F key, I get an F. If I hold a layer key, now F could be 5, or it could be control, or it could be shift. It could be anything you want. It also does a thing called mod tap. So mod tap is, think of it like if you hold the key, it will be control, but if you tap it, it could be a letter, or an ampersand, whatever you want. A very popular version of this is called Space Cadet. So you have 2 shifts on the keyboard. Lots of programs use shift. Lots of programs also use parentheses. Why can't they do the same thing? If you hold it, it is a shift key. But if you tap the left parenthesis, it's an open parenthesis. Or sorry, left shift, it's an open parenthesis. Right shift is a closed parenthesis. It's called Space Cadet. It's a feature built into a lot of these firmwares. You don't have to use it, but you can. So I'll you have there.
How do you tell the difference, or how does it tell the difference between knowing that it's held down or it could be a shift or whatever, and invoking the auto repeat?
There is a timeout. You cannot use auto repeat with mod tab. Yeah, great question. But the way it tells the difference is there's a timeout, 500 milliseconds. If you hold it longer than 500 milliseconds, it's shift. If you just tap it once, then it's a parenthesis. You also have auto shift. This is a really cool feature. So you're just typing along. So if you press the F key, it's an F. But if you hold the F for half a second or whatever timeout you decide, it will not be a capital F. So you don't even need shift keys. There's also caps word. This is similar to caps lock. So you press the caps word key, and now when you start typing letters, they're all in capital. If you push a space or any non-caps word pattern key, you are now back in lowercase. So this is super helpful if you're typing constants in programming. I saw another example last night that was really good. Or acronyms, that's it. So if you want to type QMK, push caps word, QMK space, now I'm back into regular lowercase mode. We also have the next two keys, MET and hyper. So these are very, very similar. One of them is, MET is left control, shift, and alt. Hyper is the exact same thing with the super key. And you're wondering, those are weird key combinations. Why would you ever use those? And the fact is, nobody does. Most operating systems don't use these, and most programs don't associate anything with these key combinations. So the cool thing there is that you can have a mapping software on your computer. So I can hold hyper and push B, and that's my browser. And the only thing that is going to intercept that is the mapping software that I've installed. But the hyper key and the MET key are one key, so you don't have to do some weird contortion to get this to happen. You can hold something that would be equivalent of control and push B, and now your browser opens.
And most OSs can read those, you're saying?
Most OSs don't have these mapped to anything.
But
It'll work, yeah. I know it works with Mac, and I know it works with Linux. I am not familiar enough with Windows to know if that'll do anything. But yeah, as far as I can tell, and from reading the documentation, Windows has no key combination that starts with Control Shift Alt Super, and then a letter or a symbol. So you can hold that key and then press a letter or a symbol, and you can have a mapping software that catches that and does a thing. So this is Mirgoku. It is a what I would call a framework, firmware framework. It has support for QMK and ZMK support. It has a wide range of keyboards that it can fit on. They are all 36 keys though, so even if you have 60%, it only maps 36 of those keys. It's a little bit hard to tell, but on the thumb cluster at the bottom, you can kind of see magenta, cyan, yellow, and then green, blue, red. So those are layered keys, so if you hold any of those thumbs down, then the color underneath that is what is activated on the rest of the thumbs. It typically has one layer on the right hand you hold, then the left hand changes. If you hold on the left hand, the right hand changes. But you can do a ton of stuff with this. It has flags for flipping which side is the number pad and which side is the navigation. And is it, obviously this is not QWERTY layout, so do you use QWERTY layout or Colmac or something else? So you can kind of give a command line utility that you can just make a key map if you have 36 key keyboard or a bigger keyboard and you just want to try it out. There are some other frameworks that I listed here. They're not quite as popular. Mirgoku is probably the most popular one. But if you want to see if there's other frameworks out there, you know, keyboards that are a little bit larger don't necessarily require framework because they have keys for everything. So alternative layouts. So there are a bunch of keyboard layouts. So QWERTY is the default layout. That's what you see on every laptop, every keyboard out there you've probably seen thus far. It's probably here to stay. We're not getting rid of it. So just if you want to switch between your laptop and your desktop on a work machine, definitely stick with QWERTY. But if you're interested in, if you have finger pain or wrist pain, some of these other ones can kind of help because you don't have to contort your hand to get common words spelled. So Dvorak, what it focuses on is going left hand, right hand, left hand, right hand. So the next letter in English languages would be on the opposite hand. So this reduces, like, if you type out reset secret database, that's all left hand. On Dvorak, it's back and forth. Now, it does this at the downside of symbols. If you're a developer, Dvorak's probably going to be annoying because they move all of the symbols everywhere else on the keyboard to get the letters into the center. And I know most people are thinking most of the letters are in the center, but like some of the symbols is underneath your pinky. No, that's a letter now. So they move those symbols. If you move that symbol, oh, we have to move this other one. And then it's just a cascading effect. Now the symbols are on the edges, and you can't find them. Colmac kind of solves this. This brings most of the keys, or the letters that you would use to the home row. So they don't focus on going alternate hands. They just want you to move your fingers to other keys as minimally as you can. So the ones you use the most are in the center, the ones that are on the home row, and other keys or other letters that you use very often are very close to that. So like letters that are used less often are moved towards the outside of the keyboard. This is a little bit easier to learn because all it does is moves the letters. It does not move any of the symbols. All the symbols are identically where they were. And all the shortcuts are where you would expect. Cut, copy, paste, undo, Control-Z, Control-C, Control-V, all in the exact same spot. They don't move any of those, so muscle memory, you can keep that. That's all I got for now. Are there any questions?
You know what? The question is I think the granddaddy of all mechanicals, albeit there's a layer of memory below it, is the M.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know If you use an M,
Yes. So that uses buckle spring switches. They are mechanical keyboards. They're old. They're still everywhere. I see almost on a weekly basis on Reddit, people are finding them in college dumpsters or college recycling piles.
And they're damn near indestructible, so if you fish it out of a dumpster and clean it, it will probably
It still works.
work. Yeah.
Yep. The downside to those is they have a proprietary hookup, so a lot of people either need to change out the controller or change out the cable to work somehow with USB or find some kind of an adapter to hook it up to a regular keyboard. Or a regular
it's
computer.
the PS2 to
It is, yeah, PS2, yep.
USB adapter. Because I don't know. I've seen on the web people say that that is the greatest mechanical keyboard ever made. And Unicomp is an American company that they bought the patents and some of the machinery to make that keyboard. So you can actually get brand new M's today.
Oh, that's really cool.
But the catastrophically buckling spring technology is unlike anything that Cherry makes or any other company.
Yeah, if you have worked with a buckle spring keyboard and you like the buckle spring, I would say definitely stick with that if you can still find it. They don't make, I haven't heard of a lot of newer keyboards coming out with that, so, but if the M is making a.
I think the patent locks it up.
What is that?
The patent locks it up.
It probably does.
Yeah.
I was gonna bring one if I didn't have to carry it around all day.
Yeah, I was gonna bring way more keyboards and I filled my backpack with these in and these have like aluminum cases and I'm just like, yeah, it's way too heavy, I'm not bringing more keyboards. Any other questions? Oh, we got a lot. Okay, I think you had your hand up first.
So, for those in the room who have never had a mechanical keyboard, where should we start? This is a whole lot of detail.
Yeah.
A lot of people probably gonna build from scratch, like the very first one. What should they start with?
So I would say it depends on what you're using it for. Like I said, if you're a sysadmin, you want 100% full keyboard. If you're not, you can buy pre-made keyboards where you can just swap out the keycaps if you want to. You don't have to. WASD keyboards, WASD is a great one. That's what I started out with. The 10 key list that I had at the beginning of this talk was a WASD keyboard. I used that for a year and it was great. It had, you can pick between the red, the blue, the brown switches. And you can swap out keycaps, all those things. Very good. That's a good spot to start. If you want something smaller, gaming, you don't necessarily need like the number row or the arrow keys. A 60% keyboard gives you so much mouse space. As you can see, this is obviously much smaller than a regular keyboard, and all you need is WASD or these four. You have so much space over here for the mouse. So if you're doing first-person shooters, 60% keyboard, definitely the way to go. I think you had your hand up again?
Do you know of any manufacturers that include that little red movement thing in the middle?
I do not. I've seen, so that's the mouse.
Hula point.
What is it called?
Hula point.
Hula point? Hula, the hula point, okay. I haven't seen any manufacturers that have that, but I have seen custom keyboards where they've like drilled out pieces of the keycaps and put it underneath and done custom firmware, like I said, with QMK. It also incorporates pointers, so they wrote firmware in QMK to handle that. I don't think I've seen any manufacturers that have that by default, but it wouldn't surprise me if they're out there. There are a lot of people who love it.
Unicomp makes one. They make one with that little track button in the center.
Yeah.
And they also make one with a big trackball up in the right-hand corner. So it's old school
Oh
retro.
yeah, I didn't have time to go over everything. There are keyboards out there called Dactyl Manuforms, and they are split keyboards. They have a shape this way and this way, and they have thumb clusters, and they can be tented. But they also include trackballs and trackpads. If you want to go that crazy, definitely do your research. There's a keyboard out there for almost anybody that wants to do almost anything. I believe the heckler section back there had their hand up.
Yeah, so all of the examples that you showed are smaller keyboards.
Yes.
So my question is there part of this custom keyboard community that does larger keyboards, or does everybody have a thing against numpad?
Most people lose the numpad right from the get-go. 10 keyless or smaller. But there are manufacturers that make larger mechanical keyboards and things that are 100%. Most people, when they get into mechanical keyboards, realize if they're not using a number pad all day, they want a little bit more mouse real estate, or they want to travel with it, so they do very often and quickly go to smaller keyboards. I would say the 10 keyless, and like I said, the 60% keyboard, you can find hundreds of PCB manufacturers that make 60%. You can find dozens of cases and materials for 60% keyboards. So if you want to get into a fully custom keyboard, 60% is probably going to be your easiest bet. But there are larger, like 10 keyless, there are open source keyless, 10 keyless firmwares, PCBs and cases and all that. So if you want to get into larger keyboards, you can. 100% keyboards you can buy. I mean, there's Logitech makes mechanical keyboards that are 100%. You can get those at Best Buy and stuff like that. Not quite as high of a quality, I wouldn't say, but you definitely can get larger keyboards.
Because I know Cherry sells like point of sale systems that are
Yes.
like 160 key,
Oh wow. Okay.
but they're all rubber domes. They don't make those in mechanical.
Okay.
that's
They,
all
they
I'm
used to make
wondering.
them with Cherry MX black switches. Like there were people at McDonald's and stuff popping the keycaps off, and oh, it's a Cherry black switch. Like it's a mechanical keyboard. So that was awesome. But again, I'm not too familiar with larger keyboards. Obviously, the two I brought today are a little bit smaller, so I like the smaller stuff.
I'm just looking for a solution that having 2 keyboards on my desk. That's
Got
all I'm
it.
asking.
Okay.
There are small detached numpads.
Yeah.
That's-
Oh yeah, that's
Okay,
another
I've seen
thing.
those.
So we, again, I didn't have time to cover everything. Macro pads. You can get a macro pad. So as an April Fool's joke 5 years ago, Stack Overflow had a 3-key macro pad, and it was a control button, a C button, and a V button. So you can copy and paste, and that was all the keyboard did. But you can use the QMK firmware, so you can remap that to anything. So if you're a gamer and you want to have a play pause button for your music, you can make it do kind of anything you want. I think Jason is in here. He uses hypervisor to switch it back and forth between which monitor is hooked up to his computer. I think in the yellow shirt you had here in the back there.
Is there anyone who does keyboard builds for like accessibility? Like I know with people with like dyslexia and stuff that have trouble typing because of it. Do they have anything?
I don't know anybody in the space that does it specifically for like dyslexia. I have seen a couple of like one-handed keyboards on Reddit, but I don't know enough about that to speak to that.
For those of us using the vintage model M's or possibly other PS2 keyboards,
Yes.
Has anyone else had trouble finding PS2 to USB adapters that are reliable and have managed to find one that is reliable?
Here's your guy.
Model Price actually makes some, and they were on sale a couple of months ago. I grabbed a couple of them.
They're pretty good.
They seem to work very well. And also, at work, we used to get the Trip Light ones, the same people that do UPSs and stuff. Those seem very reliable in a lot of like servers and stuff. So depending upon where you're
All right,
shooting.
final point, we're done. So the Tech Lancaster Slack, if anybody here is an admin, can you raise your hand in the Tech Lancaster Slack, look around. If you want to be in the Tech Lancaster Slack, they mentioned that in the opening, ask for an invite. We have a Mech Keyboards channel if you have questions. It's not super active, but people post interesting stuff in there all the time, so definitely check it out. And that's all I got.
All right.